Let's start our global policy update looking at the latest development between the U.S. and China, where the U.S. Treasury Secretary Yellen has raised concern about the overcapacity of China when it comes to the manufacturing sector. In recent times, China has engaged in the manufacturing of electric vehicles, which to the U.S., according to U.S., has been raising some concern about the imbalanced macroeconomic activities taking place in China. Why is the excessive capacity of China of interest to the U.S.? Let's shift the conversation to our in-house guest who has joined us. We've been joined by Dr. Idahosa Osamhanze as usual. Glad you have joined us this morning.
Very good morning.
How was your weekend?
Always hectic. Good morning, Blessing.
Good morning.
Glad you have. You're always busy. Yeah, it's what we'll do. Our job is 24 hours. So.
Oh yeah. Weekend is much more hectic than weekdays for some of us.
That's true. All right, let's look at the thrust of this conversation, these economic ties. I want to use the word, if that would be preferable, the economic rivalry between the U.S. and China, where the U.S. Treasury Secretary is also raising concerns about the overcapacity of the Chinese manufacturing sector. Talking about some of the activities China has engaged in recent times, the manufacturing of vehicles, solar panels. The U.S. is raising these concerns. Why do you think these concerns are coming at this time, and how important are they to economic growth, or when it comes to the global trade? What will be the impact?
Well, I think the American government is struggling to survive, hugely threatened by the capacity of the Chinese government to be able to supply the world with EV vehicles, and at a very reduced price compared to what the American companies are doing. And this is raising concern for investors in America. This is what the real issues are, but we see Yellen trying to convince China that it would be better for them to have a balanced growth right home, because according to her, the Chinese consuming population is disempowered financially, and it would be better that China also see how to reduce excess of production to supply the world market than focusing on internal economic balance. As far as I'm concerned, I don't know how that is, but international trade is about negotiation. It's trying to put your cards on the table and see how much you can address. Because the huge issue in the American elections this year is the economic survival of the United States of America and how they can retain superiority in terms of the participation in the global space, and that they are fast losing to China because of this, what she described as overcapacity. China has invested so much. And this is because the Chinese government over some years, over 15 years now, had asked themselves a very simple and basic question. They had looked at the trend from the 1980s to date, and they called all their business people together and said, in the 1980s, it was something that was very, very, looking for this right word to use now, to put money in Japan, for example. So it was profitable for big companies in America to go invest in Japan. And that was because labor at that time was very cheap, technology was cheap, and of course, Europe was saturated because of cost of employment. And then everybody went to Japan. Now, as the economy of Japan evolved, monies were moved out of Japan to the Asian tigers. You had Malaysia, you had Indonesia, Singapore. These people became the new destination for investment because labor also had increased. And now, while money was in Singapore and China is growing, of course, in the 2000s, we saw that money also was moving out of Asia and it was coming into China. Why? Because they also see that labor was still very cheap in China. So what was the driving force for this high cost of production? And the factor that it was labor. So Chinese asked themselves, if this money has been moving around from Japan and now it has come to Asia and in China, now labor is also getting up. Because as economy is evolving, the cost of labor also go higher. So what's going to happen? Will this company also move out their money out of China, maybe to third world country? So that was a big question to answer. And that what was the single variable that was driving this cost? And said it was labor. And because if you don't increase the wages, labor will go on strike. And you shut down your economy. Productivity is down. And they said to themselves, can we find a replacement for labor? And this was just a time that humanoids and robotics were evolving. So Chinese took advantage of robotics and humanoids and invested heavily in that industry to replace human hands in the factory. So that if economy is down, you turn off the button. If the economy is require excess, you press the button. And nobody go on strike, nobody protest. And then, of course, you can maintain price and nothing goes up. And I think it's what we've seen that is working out for China as we speak. For over 60 to 65% of the workforce in factories are done by robotics. And they are not asking for any wage increment. So that is what is happening. And I think it's just strategy thinking that they are positioning themselves, and today they are the world's largest producer. And that's why we're talking about overcapacity. So you can't see a robot say he's tired or he want to go on break.
All right, so in this case where China has been able to achieve manufacturing overcapacity, and it's beginning to hurt the American economy to the extent that the Treasury Secretary would want to have talks with the Vice Premier of China to see how they can come around it. But it's not guaranteed that China would accede to the demands of the US. What happens to developing a strategy or even a technology that matches what China has to boost production in the US? Does the US not have that capacity?
Yeah, but you see, that's the point I'm making. You see, when you are factoring price, you are looking at what are the components that comes into pricing of a particular product. You're seeing human labor. You're seeing inputs, whether they are raw materials and the rest of all those things, and you put your margin, and that tells how much price you can sell. Now, when you look at the scenario I just painted, in terms of human inputs, you'll find that whatever that is produced in China will ever be cheaper than what is produced in the US. And so as long as the world is facing a huge economic challenge, people are offering to pay less, not more, no matter how much you think or you speak quality. And as a matter of fact, really, because China produces everybody, even the Americans are using Chinese-made product because it's cheaper than what is produced at home. This is why people are asking that the US probably have to raise tariff so that the prices of the goods produced in China that is sold in America can be as competitive as those ones that are produced locally. But if you put that as a question, US is just 300 million people. But China has a whole world to sell to at that cheaper cost. So whether US market or not, the Chinese market will still be finding relevance among developing nations and even Europe. So you can't stop them from entering. And even if you raise tariff at home, it will only affect one market. It will not affect the global market. And that's why I feel that the trade secretaries in China, rather than fight a trade war, and she's opting for a negotiation and see whether Chinese can be convinced to lower its production capacity so that, or maybe increase price, and then see how you can find balance both home in China and also globally.
The U.S. Treasury Secretary had a conversation with the Chinese Vice Premier. The conversation lasted for almost 4 hours, and then the concern raised by Yellen is the fact that China needs to give a level playing field for American firms and American manufacturers as well. It appears as if China has prioritized its own. How do you see this playing out? Do you see this advocacy being taken seriously? The need to create the same playing field for American manufacturers as well?
Yeah, I don't think that's Chinese issue. And that was what Donald Trump has also been clamoring for in the campaign, that if he had won the last election, by now he would have been able to put American company to be as competitive as possible. But all the things that they were trying to do at that time were distorted by Democrats coming into power, and all the policies that they were trying to put in place to ensure that the American company become really competitive was distorted. So this is the issue. And I think they had to really concentrate more at home, at economic policy at home. Like they say, international relations is the extension of domestic policy. But nobody go to the international scene and sit on the table and negotiating for other countries in the world. Every country is negotiating for itself. So we can't see China negotiating themselves out of relevance, of profit-making and productivity, because they are wanting a balance of trade for American company. So it's left for Americans to also see what strategy they need to put in place and how they need to actually drive and convince China otherwise, so that they can lower the capacity to produce or deliver. But that for me is issue that, yes, the Chinese premier might say yes, but I'm not saying as I conceding to that. And a couple of other things that also came out in that meeting, which of course including the financing of Russia from the American banks and the things like that. Those are very high diplomatic and sensitive materials. We see the world congregate around NATO and Russia. So how they are able to also press that on is a different ballgame. And I think in the weeks and days to come, we'll see how this play out between America and China. But I understand that this is a superiority and ego war, and I'm not sure that China is buying to any pressure.
All right, you mentioned that when Donald Trump was president of America, he had plans to help the U.S. capacity in terms of production and the trade issues it's having with China. What do you think that Donald Trump would have done differently than what the U.S. has been able to do over the years in terms of how much of production they're able to do and the competitive advantage that their companies have? And then secondly, the Treasury Secretary mentioned that the model that is being employed by China, the production model that is employed by China, is capable of causing global economic dislocation. What would that actually mean for the world?
Well, the simple way to understanding the politics of America is to see what the Republicans stand for and what the Democrats stand for. Now, once you see a Republican government in place in America, what you're going to see is that there will be a targeted policy to ease life for companies and corporations and big businesses. Either you see reduction of taxes, reduction or relaxing of regulations on companies so that they can become globally very competitive. And what that means is that if you are relaxing taxes and you're giving incentive to companies to survive, then of course you see pricing become very difficult for the local people. Now, you see Republicans being pro-business and Democrats being pro-people. Now they're looking for more money. Democrats are always looking for more money from companies, which come in the form of tax, to be able to meet their social obligations to a citizen, which is the real essence of their being. Now, this is what is also affecting pricing. So if you tax company, they transfer that bill to the final consumer, and that makes the cost of production become higher. Now, this is the difference between the Republican and the Democratic regime in America, and that affects really how companies survive. Now, what you see is that once prices become high, the consumer, because they are intelligent buyers, will want to buy from where things are cheaper. So what the Biden regime needs to do is to see how to empower or incentivize corporations in America to be able to produce at prices that are competitive with China. Because in terms of quality, they are matching. So why will I need to spend more buying a made-in-American product if I can get it cheaper in China and the quality is the same? So this is the decisions that consumer will take. And that is what is affecting this industry. So is it that you have to loosen the grip on the corporations and allow them to make profits at home? And then, of course, you reduce their taxes, give them more incentive, and then they can produce at lower prices that can be as competitive as what will be produced in China. And this is where the challenge is for the democratic regime. But looking at trade dislocation, that's what it is. We cannot but encourage all countries in the world to be as productive as China. That's what it is. So what it means is that if China is producing at this capacity and they are able to provide things that are very cheap globally, all factories in the world will be shutting down. That's what it means. And that's why you see the secretary is talking about the global economic dislocations. Because they come to your country and say to you at a cheaper price than what you can produce locally, and the quality is even better. So you see your people naturally will protest. So it's like pushing the work back again to protectionism, where you have to enact laws to ensure that entering of goods that are made from China become a problem. And I think this is what the Women Secretary is speaking to, that we need to see how to tread softly so that Chinese don't overextend their capacity and then we don't dislocate the global economic order.
Now, the U.S. lawmakers, they are calling on Biden administration to increase tariffs on electric vehicles made by the Chinese manufacturing companies in order to encourage the U.S. producers. Do you see Biden yielding to this demand, just like what Trump did a few years back?
Well, if the government of America yield to the pressure of the Congress to put increased taxes on goods or vehicles made from the U.S., they should know that they are not a monopoly of economic tools, because America is also selling to China. So that's one way to look at it. So if you're increasing, that of course increases the hostility between the two nations. That's what it means. So if you are targeting me and you want to ruin me economically, you see Chinese must also be looking out for a way to hit back at America. And that, of course, may not be as sweet as it would be. And of course, don't also forget what that implication will mean, because China then will be looking for that market. And then if you are protecting them from entering into your country, then you cannot stop them from entering into rogue states. And they, of course, consolidate the relation between China and those who American call rogue states. And then, of course, complicate what you see global security issues. So these are issues that, of course, are critical. And I think that is why the Biden administration is prioritizing diplomacy, negotiation over trade instruments of control.
All right, so the U.S. Treasury Secretary says that a discussion with the Vice Premier of China, she can consider the 4-hour talk as productive. So does that mean that there might not be need for a trade war? There might just be some compromise along the way. Do you foresee compromise?
Well, I think Chinese are very strategic, and like they also have reported locally that it was a productive meeting. It was useful. That's at the diplomatic table. How these are going to translate into numbers are the things that we have to be looking at in the days and in the weeks to come. Is it that we're going to see a China that is going to reduce its productive capacity? Or are we going to see a China that is going to increase prices of what it produces by itself and see how much to boost the local economy to create a balance in the Chinese local economy. All these things are not something that we can take away from conversation at table. So like they say in my local village, it is the person who argues with the king that stays longer in Nini. If you say yes to the king, the conversation gets over quickly. So I think these are for me what that conversation are. China is bent on being the largest economy in the world and being the most superior country. And that, of course, is an ambition, I think, that the president of China will not want to joke with.
The economic rivalry between the U.S. and China has been an age-long thing. But let's look at the impact on developing nations, because it's looking at this power play won't stop. They remain strategic partners, whichever you look at it or whichever way you look at it, they will ever remain strategic partners. But what will be the impact of this power play, these economic ties, and then this rivalry between the U.S. and the China on African nations or developing nations?
Well, I just think we live in a common world, and that people talk about the gains and the ills of globalization. You have a one world that is united together by technology, and so we all have equal access, as it were. You have the American having issues here and China having issues. But if you have any diplomatic row between China and America, what you feel elsewhere is like they say, when the elephants are fighting, the grass suffers. So those are the issues. And that's because most of the developing world had not leveraged the power of education to see how to grow their economy and be as self-reliant and resilient as possible. So once there's a global shock, the poorer people or the poorer nations, they bear the brunt and they suffer. So that's what it is, as long as those struggle for supremacy continue. And if you actually have studied the history of China, and you know that Chinese are very proud people because they have one of the most superior civilizations before the emergence of America. Although if you remember the Opium War, how the British naval power really suppressed that civilization at the time. And then, of course, rising from those rubbles of defeat, and they're trying to see how to position themselves on the world stage. That's what Chinese is doing, and they really don't care about what other people are doing. They are focusing on themselves, and they are looking internally. And they've been able to do that since 1948. You remember that at a certain point, when Mao Zedong became the Chairman Mao, as is popularly called, had to shut down China from connecting with the world for a period of 30 years. And within that period, a new culture was evolved by the Chinese people, that even the current language speak now came in that period. And so you see how strategic a country can be to compete globally. So it's not something they started yesterday. It's something that they've been doing all their way, but they're also very conscious and they don't want to suffer defeat. And that is why people are talking today, really. That China is not just developing industrially, even in terms of military capability, they are also doing very hugely. And you can see all the drones that are flying around in Taiwan to show to the world that, look, China is not just an economic hub, China is also a military power. And so these are the things that are before us, and we do hope that this diplomatic row between China and America end at trade, and it does not translate into other area of power and struggle. Otherwise, there will be a catastrophic consequences globally.
Would it be said or seen as the world was sleeping when China was so determined and resolved to become a world superpower, and it has gone ahead in terms of trade, military, as you've talked about, and even politically? And what are the lessons to learn for countries that may want to build on their strength?
Well, the same laws and principles that governs the world, and that's why they say to people today, even at individual level, if you are so concerned about what other people are doing or what other people are saying, you will actually not be able to develop yourself. And so the best way to actually develop and evolve successfully is for you to actually focus on yourself. And I think that's what the Chinese government had done over years. They don't really focus on what's happening on the outside. They are more focused about what they can do and how to grow resilience and how to support whatever thing that is happening within the local China. And so that's what they are concerned about. The Chinese want to perpetuate their culture. They want to see that their religion is one of the best in the world. They want to see an economy that is growing. And so they are not actually out there to say, okay, we want to compete with you. So you develop your internal capacity, and that's what you take to the global space. And if you have the quality and you have the right pricing, then of course you can penetrate. So they are doing diplomacy because they have perfected their art at home. Their technology had been tested and now is trusted globally. And then, of course, everybody is welcoming China. And they have made so much money also to throw around to nations that are developing, which is actually making Chinese to be a strong force to be reckoned with globally. So what nations need to learn is to see how to perpetuate themselves, focus on yourself, and stop really looking up to the outside. And once you can shut yourself out from the distractions that come from global politics, then you will be able to develop capacity and potential within yourself. And this, of course, when you perfect, you can commercialize and sell to the global space. And I think that's what nations should learn.
As much as we're talking about the differences or the rivalry between the US and China, interestingly, I realized that they have certain things in common. And I would like to make reference to it the way an analyst put it, and I would like you to react to it. He says, Americans value education just like China values education. Americans work hard, and China works even harder. Both Chinese and Americans enjoy doing things together. They have communal spirit. How do you react to that?
Well, I won't agree completely with those sentiments. The truth of the matter is, as it is today, really, in terms of education, China are doing better than America because the American population is not focusing on education anymore, but that used to be because the lot of things that come from comfort when you are successful. Managing success is always a difficult story. And so in terms of emphasis on education, American education system is deteriorating. You can't compare with China as we speak, really. Chinese is having the best education system globally. And this is an education that is so functional as against what you see that's playing out elsewhere in the globe. So, yes, they may have that kind of experience, but it's different. But then again, you come to China and America in terms of cultural superiority or community life. And I think it's also different because there's so much individualism in America, and that is not pronounced in the communist China. So, you see, you have capitalism playing out in both countries here, but you see, communism is the superstructure upon which the Chinese communities are built, while Americans' own is built on individualism. So what you see play is that you can't see the kind of that consensus. As large as China is, you can see the entire parliament all giving one man the nod to lead them as long as he's alive. You can't find that in America. It's not possible.
What about the issue of working hard? This analyst said, Americans, they work hard, but Chinese, they work harder.
Well, of course, and that's what I'm saying, at different epochs. So before, America used to be a very hard-working country. That's why when you look at the movie The Men That Built America, you see people who are very, very active and hard-working civilization. And they put in a whole lot to ensure that their civilization grow. But you can't say that of this current generation of the Americans who love enjoyment. They can't even hardly finish high school, a lot of the American children as we speak. And of course, there's influence of drug that is in there, and there's antisocial behaviors that freedom brings. In America, it's also affected the kind of work. When, of course, a child can call police for his mother or father, no discipline. But you can't see that in China, where you are emphasizing democracy and the rule of law. and misdemeanors are tolerated in America. They cannot be tolerated in China. Hard work is the only way to go in China. If you're not hardworking, then you must be a thief, and then you give your life for it. That can happen in America. So you see, yeah, I may look at it and say, oh, yes, you have some community spirit, you have some level of hard work, but it's not compared to what is happening in China. China work real hard. And you see laborers that are demanding in what they call a good working environment, motivation, and the rest of it. Chinese people are self-motivated. So this is, for me, the real difference. Yes, they can see some people or maybe other ethnic nationality in America doing so well in terms of hard work, but the real Americans are actually losing it as against what's happening in China, because in China, everybody is focusing and seeing how to get an education that is as active and developing as possible. And they have all done all prototypes of anything that you can think in the world. So they are forward thinking, and that's why they have so emerged. And like Putin said, American economy is actually behind China in terms, if people were to rank things rightly.
Do you think the liberal system that the Americans operate is part of its undoing, and the conservative nature of China is also what is helping it shorten certain influences that it thinks would be harmful to its population and to its economy and even other aspects of life in the country, is what has also helped them? Look at their education, for instance, pattern it the way they want it. Look at the education system in Nigeria, copy here and there. What do you think about it?
Well, that is what it is. When a system is too liberal, and of course you're going to find all manners of behavior, deviant behaviors here and here, and then the law is protecting deviant behaviors. And this is the real issue. You know, earlier on when I spoke, I talked about how the British were able to conquer the Chinese. What was actually behind the Opium War at that time was the fact that the British government was selling opium to the Chinese. And opium was working like Indian hen, that when people take opium and they go to sleep. And the Chinese government discovered that this thing was actually affecting the productivity level in China. And they said, look, we don't want to buy opium. And Britain said, you have to buy opium. But because of the superior power they had, that naval discovery, they were able to actually suppress it and started continuing to sell opium. And then, of course, the economy of China started to go down because people were not focusing. And this is what you find. But what you have in China today is that a system that is very regulated, where indiscipline and indolence are not condoned at all. So if you're not hardworking in China, you're on your own. Because you can't steal. If you steal, you die. If you cheat, you die. And all these things are very stringent measures that are put in place constitutionally to govern the country. And so this is what is actually giving the kind of productivity and growth that we see in China today. And so when your laws are so liberal, and like the way the human is constituted, like they say in the laws of photosynthesis, plants are likely to grow towards where there is light. The human mind is likely to grow toward where there is evil. It's just natural. And if there are no stringent measures to control the natural mind, it will run wide. That's what liberalism has done even to the economy of the West.
Now, away from China, what is playing out between the U.S. and China? Now, let's talk about Nigeria now. Let's take a global policy update back to Nigeria, where the federal government intends to launch new national ID card, in collaboration with NIMC. Now, the plan is to launch 3 sets of new identity cards come May. What do you make of this development? Now, they are targeting over 100 million Nigerians. What it means is the new national ID card with a link to your bank account. That's just the advantage. But what do you make of this development? Is there a need for a new national ID card? Let's start with that.
Well, I think it's also to clarify some concept. I don't think it's completely new national ID card. I think what is happening is a collaboration that is happening between Central Bank and NIMC, which is the constitutionally empowered to create national identification, to see how they can harmonize their data with the CBN and the Nigeria Interbank settlement, and everybody come together on that one platform, and you have Afrigo to produce a card that has what your name already carry, and that is integrated into banking, and then you can use that card, which you have to request from Afrigo, and then you can use it to do transaction, whether financial transaction or social transaction, as the case may be. So it's not completely a new project as it were, but it's a project that is keying into the existing data of NEMIC to ensure that the system is linked together and financial services become more inclusive for those who naturally will not have access. And then, of course, we can also use them for social services like travel and other form of identification. I think that's what the project is all about.
What about the security risk that may be attached to this, when people have vital information in one card linked to their bank accounts? Do you worry that could be a problem?
Well, I don't think it will be so much of a problem. NIMC has assured that they will continue to protect the data of the public. But I think that there should be legislation really to be in place to regulate access to data. And I think Rwanda had put that law in place in terms of the use of their data. And they say data is private to you. And then, of course, anybody who's wanting access to your data had to seek your consent. Yes, of course, the nation is managing all the data on behalf of everybody, but that does not take away the privacy of the data as it belongs to the individual whose data is captured. And I think that that law needs to also be in place in NEMIC so that people don't just take and use your data as it were. But as said, the card that is going to be given should also come with a lot of security features such that, of course, abuses may become reduced or minimized. But overall speaking, I feel that this is the best thing to happen to us. If we have a card and we have a numbering system that is connected, it will go a long way in reducing the challenge of corruption which we currently face. So what that means for me is that anybody who is stealing money and want to use a front to hide that fund can easily be tracked. So if, for example, I am not working and all of a sudden 100 million naira is entering into my account, EFCC should come and ask me where the money is coming from. So that data become available to security agencies and people can be monitored. So if I'm buying a land somewhere and my number and my card for transaction is there, people should know that I'm the one buying the land. And of course, my status also should show on the card what kind of job I'm doing. And people can see the kind of transaction that is going on that land, can my income really carry it? And if my income is not carrying it, the onus of proof to government is on me to say, oh yes, this is how this money was legitimately earned. So this will reduce cases of fraud and corruption in the country. So that even civil servants or government officials who are taking advantage of the loopholes within the system to steal funds from government become easily traceable. So by this, you have been able to really and hugely reduce the biggest elephant in our room, which is corruption.
But we've heard these arguments before. At the time BVN was launched, it was the same argument put forward. Even when NIN was done, the same arguments. NIN, SIM link, the same thing. And even recently, when the banks started to ask for people to link their BVN with their NIN, it was the same argument. What is the guarantee that this will not be another, let's just say, another trial. And after this, we get to hear something else. What has hindered the other methods trying to ensure security and also put a stop or at least curb the level of corruption in the country? What has hindered those other methods from working would also be a problem here.
Yeah, I don't see that happening because the difference here is the fact that you are going to sync the data. The real problem we face right now with BVN and NIMS is the fact that the data are not synced. Everybody is maintaining his own server. That's the difference. So you have data in BVN is in CBN server. You have data in NIMIC is in NIMIC server. So all you need is that if you want to do bank transaction and they say, okay, authority is giving to the bank to be able to access the database to check whether you have a name number. But here, what will happen is that the syncing or the globalizing of the data, that with one simple card that you have, every service you need, you don't need a repeat to capture. If you want to go and open bank account today, you will still do thumbprint for BVN. They will still take your photograph. If you want to renew your driver's license, it's the same. If you want to do your international passport, it's the same. But with a NIMIC new mandate, what that means is that with that card, you don't need a new capture. All that is required is that you go to a bank, you want to open a bank account, you just give them your number and they type in all your data from NIM, whatever it is, will show up. So that integration is what has been missing. And once this new system is able to integrate it, then of course, all the issues I'm talking about that has not worked in the time past, we would have overcome it. But you see, of course, why are they also putting it so that you have interbank settlement scheme? Part of this project is to also see that people who don't have access to internet and the rest of them can also use USD to call up this data, and in places where, of course, internet are not available, and then you see that transaction can also happen. So this is what is the difference. So you don't need new thumbprint, you don't need new face ID. You go on the system and you just give them the number, your data show up. And I think that if we can actually put this to use, and even, of course, we can able to be identifying even criminals as they get to police station. The thing you ask from them is, where's your card? And you call up their card, and then you can enter the case against their name. So anywhere else, these things can call up. And I think that's what the world has done in terms of providing security. And I think it's a welcome development for me, for Nigeria, if we can ensure that this happens as quickly as possible.
You know, in Nigeria, there's been this growing concern about access to a centralized database and how reliable or viable this database could be. Now, what would you expect to be put in place this time around to ensure that this database is harmonized? And then you also address the issue of disparity that comes with database, whereby people give distorted information. How do you address that, or would you expect them to address this time around to make it better?
I think NIMIC is already doing that, as far as I'm concerned. Different platform has been made available for the correction of data, so that you can, on your mobile phone today, change your date of birth, you can change your name if there's anything wrong about it. That window is still open, and you are able to correct your email address, your telephone number, and the rest of it at some fee. This platform has been open, and this is in preparatory to the harmonization of data, so that if you have different name on your BVN that is different from the name on NIN, you have this window open for you now to go and change it. Otherwise, like they say in church, if you have the reason why this marriage should not hold, say it now, or forever you remain silent.
Let's talk about the challenges of acquiring this new card when it is launched in June. Now, we saw the rigors that Nigerians had to go through trying to get registered for NIN. Even till date, some have not gotten the national identity card, the permanent card. What do you think is going to happen when this new EID will be launched? Do you foresee a situation where there will be lots of crowd queuing at NIMSI offices? Do you foresee a situation where there are going to be hitches? Or maybe a system isn't working, we haven't gotten card from Abuja, things like that?
That's not going to happen at all.
Why are you confident?
I'm so confident because it's not government that is handling it. This is a private sector initiative. AfriGold is not a government company. And the goal of AfriGold is to ensure that everybody is numbered, because every card that is produced makes more money for the company owners. So just the way you walk into a bank today and you get your ATM card out, that's how it's going to be, and it's going to be seamless. So, because the things that are difficult are things that you do with government people, where a lot of people are not accountable in terms of, or responsible in terms of job roles and duty that's assigned to them. But this is a private company. And I also know that they're going to recruit a lot of agents, and banks are going to be involved. And so where you're going to get these cards, just like you have MasterCard, you go into any bank, you get it. You have Visa card, you go into any place, you get it. So this is going to happen, and there's not going to be, in my thinking, any such stampede in terms of getting the card.
All right, we just have to wrap up the conversation now. We must thank you for your intervention. Let's hope if this is launched in May, it's going to be a itch-free thing, and the kind of bottleneck that you expect with this kind of exercise will be a thing of the past.
Let's also hope that the cost that Nigerians will pay for it will not be so expensive.
There's no cost that is too expensive to be paid for security, and I think this is a game changer for Nigeria. It's something to be embraced, and every energy should be put in it to make it work right, and I think we're on the right path to growth and progress.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.